Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land, and welcome to another episode of Tristan and the Classics. In this video I'm going to be sharing with you 4 classic books that I read in the month of July, and I give you a brief synopsis of what they were about. So without further ado, let's dig in, shall we? So I read 4 classic books in the month of July, one of which was a classic in the spy/thriller adventure, you know, getting chased by the government genre, and is one of the earliest of its kind, and hence why it's a classic. It's not a classic in the exploration of human feelings, but a classic in developing a genre in a certain direction. And of course, being scared and terrorized and all that kind of high adrenaline stuff is part of our human experience. But will you know the author? That's my question. Anyway, the first classic book that I read in the month of July was F. Scott Fitzgerald, Tender is the Night. What can I say about this book? It was the book that was written after The Great Gatsby, and in its day this wasn't so popular because the public had loved The Great Gatsby. This has got a totally different feel to it. One of the things I'll say about this book is it refines your taste in literature, and I don't mean it's boring, right? It refines your taste because you find yourself, whilst reading this, you find your mind somewhat stretched. Occasionally you'll find your concentration is pushed a bit more because it's not written in a classic, easy flowing story kind of way. Don't get me wrong, it is a flowing story. But this is a time of modernism. So if you want to get into modernist works, I would recommend this book highly if you want to experience it, but not at the level of, say, James Joyce and Virginia Woolf. Because F. Scott Fitzgerald was a romantic, however, he was writing in the modernist era where people were exploring different avenues with story, different ways of writing. If you want to know about the modernist genre, check out my video, recent video actually, on exploring what modernism is. So with Tender is the Night, it's quite psychologically revealing because even the bit part players, you get an insight into their world. They're not even necessary to some degree, but they do fill out the life of the main characters, who they're hanging around with. And once again, Fitzgerald takes a look at the ritzy, you know, glamour class, but it's a much more oily and murky side, and sort of the underbelly of our negative traits as humans. I know he did that with The Great Gatsby, but not like he does in this. So the story itself starts with the girl Rosemary. She is 18 years old and she is an actress from Hollywood, and she is at the south of France, sort of recovering from a bit of the flu, a cold basically, because she's been filming in Italy and she's had to do this diving scene into the canals of Venice like so many times that she's caught like a cold. And so she's convalescing at the south of France, which is before the south of France had become, you know, the glitz and glamour place, the place for everyone to collect. Now down there on one of the beaches, there is a small hotel that is owned by the Divers. That's the surname, it doesn't mean scuba divers. Dick and Nicole Diver. And you think the story is going to be about Rose to start with, because it just follows her. It's a clever way of introducing our main characters. She sees these different people on the beach, 2 different groups particularly, and you get her inner thoughts towards them as an 18-year-old, and how some she just wishes they'd go away, others seem a little bit more exciting, and, you know, different characteristics. Some are very indecorous and clumsy in the way they go about things. There's some who are they're not native English speakers, you know, they're from other European countries, and so there's an attitude towards that slightly, just a different way of looking at things. But there's one character who really catches our eye, and that's Dick Diver. He's this man that can go to any group and he seems to just make everybody laugh, and he gets everybody to feel good about themselves, and he's quite charming to her. And then eventually he talks to her as well, and she falls in love with him. She's only a young girl. But he's married to Nicole, who is this gorgeous beauty. And she's so together, and she's so glamorous and elegant, and Rose sort of idealises the 2 of them, but she's fallen in love with Dick, and Dick, despite the fact he's older than her, he starts developing feelings for her too. So remember, this is the 20s. This is still not a topic which a lot of the public was ready for. The idea of perhaps adultery. Do they go to the full level of adultery, or is it just emotional adultery? But that's sort of explored there, and of course that's typical for the modernists. This kind of topic comes up a few times. You think of Ian Forster, you think of Evelyn Waugh. They bring up this topic. Fitzgerald, though, is like a poet. His prose, the way he structures things, is just, when he captures a scene. There's a scene where that Dick and Nicole invite this ramshackle group of people who they don't fully know, all of them, back to their home, and they have a big garden party in the evening. And sort of the description of the atmosphere is just absolutely delightful. I don't know if I've actually... Just listen to these two little excerpts from that moment in the garden, just to describe the atmosphere. So young Rose, you know, there's a whole clamour of people talking at the dinner table, and she can hear Dick in the background talking to others, and she says, this is how it's narrated. Intermittently, she caught the gist of his sentences and supplied the rest from her subconscious, as one picks up the striking of a clock in the middle with only the rhythm of the first uncounted strokes lingering in the mind. How brilliant is that? And you think that's good? Listen to what comes 2 pages later to describe the ambience of the evening, the warm evening air. But the diffused magic of the hot, sweet south had withdrawn into them the soft-poured night and the ghostly wash of the Mediterranean far below. The magic left these things and melted into the two divers. How brilliant to evoke this glorious embodiment of all that is fine and elegant in Nicole and Dick. So the story then goes on, you know, what happens between Dick and Rose. But what's interesting is Dick and Nicole love each other, but something comes to light that you don't expect. Dick's got a weakness, Nicole's got a serious flaw. And the topic that it starts to turn on is not a topic you expect to find in 20th century literature, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. What I will say is the characterization is fantastic. Some of the tangential scenes are also exquisitely put together, and it builds up this growing unease and tension and sort of tragic romance, which, to capture it like Fitzgerald does, it feels so real. And I must say, if you want to explore literature, this is a great example of what the modernist movement was doing with story. There's an element of stream of consciousness about it, but not, like I say, not like Virginia Woolf, okay? It's not bizarre, it's very moving. And just to say, when he read this to his wife Zelda, she said, "It breaks my heart." She says, because it's so beautifully written. And if you know the story of Fitzgerald and Zelda and their relationship, it makes this story all the more poignant, because while this story was drawn from the template of their own relationship. And wow, what an ending as well. There's just this, it's the type of ending I really like. Not dramatic, but leaves you breathless, almost broken. So that was Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald. The next book I read during the month of July was with my Patreon group, and that was William Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Have you read it? This is one of those books people think they know the story and they don't. People think this is a children's story. Far, far from it. Daniel Defoe wrote this, and it is known as the first realistic English novel. It is so good at exploring the thinking of a man. Of course, you know Robinson Crusoe was washed up on a desert island, but way more happens in the book than that. Yes, the majority is focused on it, but his understanding, his change of attitude from when he is in a commercial society to then having to live on his own. What is true happiness? There's an idea that comes out of this book which remains true to this day. That demonstrates a classic, because it doesn't matter what time period you're from or what background you're from, it still applies. Now, the book starts with Robinson Crusoe as a young man, Kreuznauer, he's Dutch, and his dad is talking to him about choose the middle way. Don't seek to be rich, because that comes with problems, or great. But don't be a drudge. Don't squander your life and end up poor and have to drudge through life, because that's not. Choose the middle way. Learn contentment, okay? But he's got this yearning to go somewhere, to be something. And so he runs off to, this is not giving much away, this happens in like the first 3 pages. He runs off to the port of Hull in North England, and he wants to go on adventures on the sea. But he gets into a storm, and he repents of it very quickly. Oh, God, save me and I'll obey my father and I'll go back. And as soon as he hits land, guess what? His conscience stops and he's like, no, I'll carry on, thanks. Did you know Robinson Crusoe becomes a slave? That's in this book. So that's a whole area people have no idea about. There are other things that happen to him before he is washed up on his desert island. When he is there, my oh my, is it gripping. Comments from the Patreon group were, I didn't think I'd enjoy this book, but loved it. Okay. Others said, I was put off this book because I'd seen it on TV and it just weren't my thing. But actually, it was great because it's so explorative of our human condition. Think today, people still want to escape from it all. You think of these survival programs, like me and my wife, we like to watch Alone, where 10 people are dropped in a wilderness, normally Canada, and they have to fend for themselves, you know, get food and water and shelter. That's what Crusoe does. And when you're confronted with the basic needs of life, it changes a person. Back in 1719, when this was written, people thought it was real. And it was so popular that this book ran into umpteen editions and was translated into 40 languages, can you believe? That's in the 18th century. Today, you hardly get a book translated into 40 languages, with perhaps the exception of the Bible. I mean, that's how much this book spoke and still speaks to the inner condition. You watch how he develops his island, explores it, and comes to know himself. Now, there are religious themes in this, but you don't need to be religious to enjoy it, nor should you be put off by it. There is a deep spirituality in humans. We need meaning, we need purpose. There's a lot of talk about providence in here, but it makes you explore your place in the world. There is a very serious critique of religion in here, you know, animosity towards it, against society as well. The similarities between all makeups, all different backgrounds. Now, there is, of course, the issue of colonialism and slavery, but you'll find that Defoe himself is not necessarily in favour of it. You've got to remember when reading a classic to read it in the context of its time, and some object to that, but I'll have to do another video on how to read books that contain this. However, it's interesting that he himself is a slave. So, have you read this book? It is fantastic. If you want to get into the literature and be well read, as they say, I don't advocate reading loads of books like you must read this, but I would say you should read Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, because it is the foundational novel in the English language, pretty much the first. You know, Cervantes in Spain had already written Don Quixote. That's probably contender for the first novel. I know there's a few before, like the Decameron in the Middle Ages, but the novel as we know it. But of course, it was in the English language that the novel really got its full exploration started, and that affects the global literature. So that is a foundational book to read. Have you read it? Just to say, if you love reading, if you want to get into the classics and really suck the juice out of them and explore them as a fine wine and come to appreciate how they're structured and get background knowledge of the writers, then have a look at my Patreon group. The link is in the description down below. In that group, there are 2 tiers. Every month, we have a classic book to read, and in the lower tier, you'll get my full in-depth review of that book. I'll also just starting to do a live discussion once that video is done, so anyone in the community can talk about that book, and we really break it down. In the higher tier, which is $5.99, so it's not much compared to everybody else, what I'll do is there are other videos, exclusive videos, where I explore aspects of literature. Sometimes I would do biographies of authors and know a bit about them. And literature devices and things to look out for, development of characters, which you can use in all of your reading. And I'm on an exploration of classic literature too, and so you're coming along with me in what we all call on Patreon our great literary journey. So if that sounds good to you, come and explore it. The link's down below. The third book I read in July is another classic, but not a proper classic in that it doesn't explore the meaning of life and all that. It's a classic of its genre, and it's Eric Ambler's Uncommon Danger. Have you ever heard of Eric Ambler before? He wrote in the 20s and 30s, but he's a classic in the thriller spy genre because he sort of developed or turned it towards the unwilling hero, or the wrongly convicted hero kind of trope that you get in Hollywood now. So in this book, you follow a guy called Kenton, who's just a journalist. He's a freelance, he explores, goes around Europe getting news. And this is the year 1938, and we first meet him. He's on a train in Germany heading to Austria. He wakes up in his compartment, and talk about classic now, okay? He wakes up in his apartment, and there's an older man opposite him. Knobbly nose, wearing a hat, looks a bit shifty, piercing blue eyes. And he just starts talking to Kenton, and he's rabbiting. And he says, I'm a Jew. He says, could you do me a favour? When we cross over into Austria, we're going to have to show our passports. And he says, the Germans are going to really search me because I'm Jewish, and I'm carrying all the money I've got in this package. Could you hold on to the package because you're British and you won't be searched? And Kenton's a bit unsure. He doesn't believe this guy. He thinks he's doing something nefarious and that the package doesn't have money in at all, but something, contraband. But he does the job because the guy offers him 300 marks if he'll do it. And Kenton needs the money. Now, Kenton steps out of the compartment a bit unsettled, and he sees another man walking up the train, and he's looking quickly into every compartment, sort of side-glancing very quickly. And as he passes Kenton's compartment, his glance lasts longer as he sees this man in there, and then this man vanishes. Kenton goes back in the apartment, and the older man's all a-twitter. He's like, that was a Nazi spy. He's following me. Okay, you've got to help. So when they go through customs, he says, I need you to still hold on to that package because he's going to follow me. Will you do me another favour? I'll give you another 300 marks. Could you get off the train when we get to our destination, wait half an hour or so, and then meet me at a certain hotel in room number 25, I think it is. I won't go any further into the story, but you see how that's the classic setup. What ends up happening with Kenton is he's wanted by the police, and he's wanted by 2 underground clandestine groups, spy networks, who, well, one of them at least wants to kill him, okay? And you've got all the devilish bad guy in the background who's sort of above all of the nasty torture stuff, but he's got his henchman kind of thing, and you get Kenton being chased and knocked on heads and all that kind of stuff, and running through forests. It's quite exciting. Is it the best thriller? No. No, I wouldn't say that. If you've read any other Eric Ambler, please recommend more to me. And it just made me think, would you like me to do a video where I compare various sort of drama, spy, thrillery kind of goose flesh, as Bertie Wooster from P.G. Wodehouse would call them? Would you like me to do a comparison of maybe some 20th century writers in that genre? Would that be a video of interest to you? But that was my third book for the month, Uncommon Danger by Eric Ambler. Have you even heard of this guy? The fourth classic on my list, which I read in July, is by one of the greatest writers of the 19th century. It's Anthony Trollope's The Warden. The Warden is the first in a 6-book series called the Barsetshire Chronicles, which all takes place or is set around the town, small cathedral town of Barchester. And it focuses mainly on the cathedral and the church and the small community around it. But don't think again you need to be religious for this. This is an exploration of the idiosyncrasies of people's lives. Trollope writes with such a lightness of touch. He's one of the most sympathetic writers I have ever read. He doesn't create major villains. Everyone is a human being with Trollope. He knows how they come across to others, but he doesn't judge them. There's no villain like Dickens would whip up, or like Collins would whip up, you know, classic villains. Each one, some may be, you may think them the bad guy, but you can sympathise with them. Now, the reason I've read this several times, but I'm actually recording this as an audiobook. Can you just let me know, would you be interested in an audiobook from me? It will be a paid for one, but the reason I'm doing it is because I want to give something and also raise some funds so that I can grow this channel in a way where I can go out and about. I've been asked to go out and do castles and small towns and background information. Of course, I need kit for that. So I thought instead of just asking for money, I'd provide you with an audiobook. If you are in the Patreon group, by the way, when the audiobook's finished, it will be there for free. So just to let you know. So the story about this is quite simple, and on the face of it doesn't sound that interesting, but it really is good. In the Middle Ages, in the town of Barchester, a wealthy merchant, before he died, built an almshouse, and he gave it to the church with all its lands and said, could you house 12 old men through time from the village, give them a weekly stipend, and appoint a warden to look after them and take care, all run by the church. And so that's what happened. But the church developed the lands over the centuries, and obviously the revenues coming into the church is much bigger, but the stipend for the men staying in the almshouse, they're called bedesmen, their stipend didn't really go up. Now, Trollope picks up on this because it's something that's going on in Britain at the time. There was a lot of clamour against church expenses. They were saying the church held all this wealth, all this stuff, all this charity, and they were hogging the money and not really spending it on the poor and the elderly like they should have been. And so in this book, the will is contested. Some have said, well, although the original guy made a will giving this much money, surely he meant that money to go up over time if a bigger income came in. But the church disagrees. Now, the warden at the moment is called Mr. Harding, and he is a lovely, soft and gentle man. He loves the 12 old men who he helps take care of. And he's never really questioned the income he gets. But now he's worried, not legally, but ethically, whether he's doing the right thing by having as much money. I think he gets like £800 a year or something. And so he's got this qualm. Now his son-in-law is the Archdeacon, this strident, bombastic, pompous character who's absolutely brilliant. And you do understand him, but he's not the nice guy. And yet, he defends Mother Church, and especially her income. And he tells his father-in-law, this Reverend Warden, who's lovely, he says, nonsense, you don't have to worry about it. Of course you should have the money. But there's another guy who's quite well-to-do in Barchester called Bold, and he's taken up the plight of the 12 men. The 12 men hadn't even been thinking about it, but this Bold learned about the will, and he wants justice to be done. He wants to make sure the right thing is done. But here's the catch. Bold likes the Reverend Septimus Harding, that's the warden. He likes his younger daughter and would like to marry her. And the Archdeacon is already married to Harding's older daughter. So that makes these two mortal enemies brother-in-laws. But Bold needs to do the right thing. And so you've got a bit of a love scene and a problem there. You've got the conscience of Mr. Harding wanting to do the right thing. You see the effect of potential money graspingness from the old men. They're very content, being looked after, got a great place, but suddenly you could have £100 a year. Now that's changed them. And even the press comes in this. And that's what's so interesting, because Trollope knew the press was really what caused a lot of public stir, and it does today. And how that's taken, how that's put into things. But the way he deals with his characters is just exquisite. He writes real characters. And the way he writes the breakfast, just the breakfast scene at the Archdeacon's place, who's what's his name? Dr. Grantley, always dressed in black. And the way he describes Dr. Grantley in bed, where no one ever sees a clergyman without his habit on and in his nightclothes, except the wife, and no one would ever be scared of him again if they saw him with like his nightcap on, and how his wife takes him to task on things. But you've got this love issue, as well as the legal issue, as well as the conscience issue, as well as the publicity issue, all with excellent, excellent characters. Harding's great, but his son-in-law, Dr. Grantley, oh my days, he's such a funny character. He's not funny ha-ha, He's such a strong character. A great book. Have you read it? Have you desired to read Trollope? He is very worth getting into if you've never read him. So those were the 4 books that I read in July. Have you heard of any of them? Do any of them pique your interest? Let me know. And until the next time, I wish you joy in whatever you are reading.